right. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we can make a dynamic block that works something like the speedometer. So I'm going to go over to a brand new drawing. I'm going to try to avoid this area that has my camera in there. But essentially, you have to figure out what we're going to do, right? So the first thing is we have to create a block. And what type of block are we going to create? What is it going to do? Is it going to expand? Is it going to rotate? Is it going to grow when we click on it? What is it that it's going to do dynamically, right? Other than statically. So I think one of the easiest is I'm just going to start using some shapes. And I'm going to click on the circle tool, and I'm just going to go ahead and make that circle, and I'm going to make it a block. Okay, so I'm going to type the word block, and I'm going to call this, we'll call this geometry, and we'll do a pick point right in the middle there, and I'll select my objects. Right click to go back into it and hit OK. All right, so now that I've got a block, what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on the block. So 1, 2, and that takes me to the block editor, and I'm going to click OK to get into the block editor. So what we're going to see is we're going to see the palette for authoring blocks. And the palette is broken up into 4 tabs, and we can see the tabs here. So the very first tab is the parameters tab, then an actions tab, and a parameter set tab, and then finally constraints tab. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to set some sort of parameter. And after we set a parameter, we set an action to that parameter or using that parameter. And then we can fine tune the actions by going into the properties of the parameter and kind of fine-tuning the parameters, right? So so let's see. So what do I want to do here? I want to be able to do maybe a visibility or yeah, visibility. All right. So I'm going to take the visibility parameter, and that's the very first one that, so always do parameters first, right? So specify a parameter location. So this might be an icon that we see in the block editor or in our actual block. So I'm going to left click outside here, and that's going to be our parameter location, right? So once I drop this down, then I see up here I've got a visibility states button, and this whole thing kind of lit up, and I've got visibility state 0 and a couple of icons. So what this is going to allow me to do is to create a state, a visible state, and an invisible state, right? So right now my circle is in a visible state, and I'm going to go to the properties of the visible states, and I'm going to rename this one as circle. There we go. All right, so I've got my circle state, which is visible. Then I want to create a new state, and I'm going to call this rectangle. And then the radio buttons underneath says hide all existing objects in the new state, show all existing objects in the new state, or leave the visibility of the existing objects unchanged in the new state. Well, we want to hide anything and everything that is underneath that, right? So hide all existing objects in the new state. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to click OK again. So it hid everything in my new state, which now allows me to go to my Home tab and draw a rectangle. There we go. And I'm going to go back to my block editor tab, and I've just created a second state, right? So if I do this again, I'm going to go to my visibility states, and I'm going to create new, right? Because rectangle has already been identified. And let's say hexagon, right? So hexagon, and we're going to keep hidden or hide all the other elements. So I click OK. And then I'm going to go to my Home tab and to my polygon, which is underneath the rectangle. And we want a hex, so that's going to be 6-sided object. And my center, somewhere's about here. Inscribe, circumscribe, doesn't really matter at this point. We just want some geometry. And then I'm going to go back to my block editor tab up on the top. And that's going to finish my, my states. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the left, save my block. I can test it if I want to. It just kind of keeps it in the block editor section, or I can close the block editor. Right, so what happens now is I have or should have a dynamic block. So I'm going to left click, and there's that parameter. Right, so I click on that parameter, and let me go to rectangle, and it changes to a rectangle. If I click on it again and go to hexagon, it changes to a hexagon. If I click on circle, it goes back to circle. So I've just created a dynamic block that will allow me to change views on things or give me options. So let's say you're doing a dynamic block of trees. So you could have all deciduous trees or all coniferous trees, shrubs and things like that, all in one block. So you just bring out the tree block, and then you just pick the correct tree from the list, and you're all set. You don't have to redraw. You don't have to search different blocks. Makes it nice and easy to work with. So that's one way to do it. There's also like a stretch parameter, which is kind of neat. The rotate parameter, which is what we used for the speedometer. So with the stretch, what I'm going to do is I am going to, let's do this. Let's have a rectangle, and I'm going to place a circle, 1 and 2. All right, a little crooked, but that's okay. Maybe if I can select and just kind of nudge up. There we go. All right, so this is going to be my block, and let's do it the proper way. Let's put it on the 0 layer. There we go. So now I'm going to turn it into a block. So I type the word block, make it a static block, right? And I'm going to call this Lego, right? It kind of looks like a Lego block. Pick a point for center or a base point. We'll just do that. And then I'm going to select the objects. So what are the objects in my block? I'm going to right click when I'm done. It takes me back to this and click OK. All right, so now that I've got my block and it changed blue because the object or blue layer is my current layer. And now we go into double clicking, and we want to modify or use the block editor for the Lego brick. So now again, here we have to decide what we want to do with this block. All right, so maybe we want to extend it so that it's not a 2-pip block, but maybe it's a 4 or 6 or 8-pip block, or maybe it's a double layer. I don't know. So if we want to extend it, right, let's say we want to make it longer, then what's going to be our parameter? Our parameter is going to be from the list here. Is it going to be a point? Does the point change? Does the linear parameter change? Is it a polar? What is changing about it? So you might want to do the array, but really it's just a linear change, right? So we want to specify a start point. So I'm just going to click on the top here, 1 and 2, and then I'm going to bring it up and left click to set that parameter, right? So by having that distance parameter, and we can rename this in the properties, right? So I'm going to click on it. I'm going to go into the properties, and let's see, where can I change that? Distance name, right? So we'll call this width. That's the width. I hit enter. All right, so now I've got the width, and the width is going to be what's changing, right? So the first thing to do is to have some sort of action associated with the width, right? So realistically, when we take a look, do we want it to move? Well, it's really stretching. Do we want it to scale? No. Stretch? Yes. Is it a polar stretch? Not really. Does it rotate? Does it flip? None of these things. So we want it to stretch. So I'm going to click on stretch, and we follow the prompts. The prompt says select a parameter. Well, this is the only parameter that we have currently. And then specify parameter point to associate with the action, right? So this is kind of like the handle. Where is the starting point? All right, and it kind of gave us this red X, and that's probably a good starting point. So I want to grab this handle and be able to drag it to the left or right. So click, and then specify the first corner of the stretch frame. All right, so the first corner of the stretch frame, I'm going to click outside here and in here. Left click, right? So left click, left click. So this is my stretch frame, which means that anything in that frame is going to be stretchable, right? And now it wants me to select the objects that I'm actually going to stretch. So I'm going to click on the whole block, well, because it is already one whole rectangle. And then I'm going to hit enter or right click. And now I've got this little icon, which means that it's stretchable. So let me save the block, and we're going to close the block editor, and let's see what happens. So click, there's my little action grip, and I'm pulling it, and I stretched it. All right, Control Z to undo. All right, let's see what happens if I do something else. So if I move my mouse ortho or turn it on or off, it doesn't really matter. I can make it slightly smaller. I can make it bigger. I can make it to about what it was before. So I'm going to Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, just to get it back to where it was. So that part's working, right? But now, double left click, go back into the block editor. Now I want to be able to, to maybe do this incrementally, right? So that it goes every 2 blocks, let's say. And for that, I didn't really pay attention to any measurements, so let me just measure this quickly. So we've got about 1.25 inches, about just over 3 inches, and 1.25 inches in height. So I would say about every 3 inches or so, or 1.5 inches. Let's try that, 1.5 inches. So what am I going to do? I'm going to select on the parameter, okay, because I want to control how that parameter acts, right? We already know that it's stretching, but now I want to control how much it's stretching, which has to do with the parameter. So I click on the parameter, and I select the properties, and I'm going to go down to the bottom and go down to the value set. And when I go down to the value set, it's currently set to none, and I want to make it incremental. Right, so we're going to select incremental, and the distance increments, I think I said 1.5, right, 1.5 inches. So my minimum should be 1.5 inches, or possibly 3. I'm not sure. We'll have to test that out. And distance maximum, so let's say, yeah, so as you can see, I'm pumping up these numbers, and we've already got these little interval markers, I guess, if you will, right? So that's good. So let me go back into here. So my minimum, let's say 3 inches, and my maximum, we're going to make, let's make it 9 inches. Okay, so 9 inches. So if I take a look at this, basically this is 3, then it should stop at 9 inches, right? So let's go ahead and save. So that means I got to go back to the block editor, tab, save the block. Yep, save changes. And actually, we can just do this in the test block. We haven't used the test block yet, so we're going to test the block. I'm going to left click, and we're going to grab this guy, and I can see 1.5 inch intervals. You should see these little markers. Okay, there you go. It looks like it stopped at like 7.5, so we might have to change our parameter so that it goes all the way to 9, right? Just like we want it to. Actually, I know why. Because our original set was just over 3 inches. It was like 3.1. So that's why it's not creating that final marker, which is good. All right, so we're going to close the test block, and I'm going to select my parameter, go into the properties, and go down to the value set, and I'm just going to say 10 because I don't think it should go past 10 with all of those incrementals, right? So good. So we're going to save the block, and I'm going to close the block editor. Let's see it in action here in this window. So I grab it. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's as far as I go. And it goes about 9 inches or, 3 sets. So we've got that part down. All right. And it's working pretty well. Double left click, go back into the block editor. Now we have to get the circles to stretch along with it, right? So do we need another parameter for that? I don't think so, because it's really, we're performing another action, right? We want another action, and we want the array action, okay? Because we want these to multiply in a linear fashion as we stretch, right? So we're going to use array, and we want to select the parameter. So the parameter is going to be the width parameter, okay? And then select objects. So what are the objects that I want to array as I'm using the width parameter? Well, that should be these 2 circles. All right, and then I'm going to right click to finish my selection. Enter the distance between columns. So this kind of has imaginary columns, and I'm just going to take a wild guess, and I might have to go back and forth on this a little bit until I figured it out. But the columns, I think it was saying, let's see, where is my base? I'm trying to find what it's doing. So we're 3 inches. So let's say 3. Okay, let's say 3. Distance between columns is 3. Enter. So now I've got 2 icons when it's attached to this width parameter. And let's save the block, and yes, and then we're going to go test it and see if it actually does what we want it to do. So click, and I'm going to click on the grip, move this over a little bit, and as I move, those will actually multiply. So that's pretty much exactly what I wanted it to do. The only problem is if I go kind of on in-between steps, I'm not going to get the full, the full 2 pips, right? So that means I can't go 1, I have to expand by 2 to get the 2. So maybe a better design would have been to do just 1 pip, and then make the minimum, distance 2, so that I start with a double, and then I can incrementally grow 1 pip at a time, right? So, but this works pretty well. Not perfect, but it is doing pretty much what I expected it to do. And that is all set. So I'm going to close the test block. That's that big green checkbox there. And I'm going to close the block editor. It's going to ask me to save. So yes, of course. And now I can test it here for real. So again, going 1 is not going to do anything. Going 2 will actually give me the array. So every 3 inches, it's kind of bringing that in. And that can be modified, of course, based on the settings. So here we've got 2 dynamic blocks that we just created using parameters and actions. So as long as you figure out the correct action and parameter, or parameter and action, parameters first, then action, then you should be good to go. If you're working on the speedometer, read it. It's just a couple of paragraphs, and using that in conjunction with the video here, you should be all right. You just got to figure out the right numbers, right? And remember that your job is to solve problems. So you guys are problem solvers. Solve this problem. Go and get it. You can do it.